properly within your family, your children will be okay. Several years ago, I did a series of parenting workshops, primarily for working women. I began each workshop by writing on the chalkboard the sentence, "In my family, my children come first." And then I said, if you subscribe to this, raise your hand. Inevitably, 8 out of every 10 women in those audiences would immediately do so. And that's unfortunate, because it's a statement of misplaced family priorities. You see, in the years since World War II, what has happened is that, as a culture, we have become increasingly obsessed with raising children, neurotically preoccupied with making sure they get enough attention. And in the process, we have elevated children to a position of preeminence within families that they do not deserve, have certainly not earned, and do not benefit from. And the more child-centered the American family has become, the more self-centered American children have become. Although everything that I'm going to say in the next 25 minutes or so applies as well to single-parent families as it does to families in which there are 2 parents, I'm going to limit my remarks to the latter. That includes families where both parents are the biological parents of the children, as well as blended families in which one or both of the adults may be step-parents. In a 2-parent family, the secret to raising children, the secret to meeting the needs of the children, is to put the marriage first. The marriage has got to be the priority. After all, it was the marriage that created the family. The marriage preceded the children, and it is meant to succeed them. In describing this type of family, I use the term parent or marriage-centered. In order to clarify what I'm talking about, let's take a look together at what a family really is. I look at a family in much the same way as a biologist might look at a cell under a microscope. The biologist knows the cell is the basic building block of biological life. At the functional center of that cell, there is a nucleus, and that nucleus runs the show, so to speak. It is the executive authority within that cell. As such, it regulates the cell's metabolism, reproduction, and other essential functions. It mediates that cell's relationship to other cells, and it determines what role that cell is going to perform within the larger organism of which it is a part. The biologist knows that if the nucleus of the cell is healthy and performing its role properly, the cell itself will be healthy. On the other hand, if the nucleus is not healthy, if its function has been disrupted by disease or the invasion of foreign matter, it becomes less capable of performing its role, and the cell begins to deteriorate. In a similar way, a family is the basic unit of social life. It is a social cell within a larger social organism. And a family has a nucleus too. That nucleus is the marriage. And as is the case with a biological cell and its nucleus, if the marriage is doing its job within the family, if the marriage is healthy, then the family as a system will be healthy, and each individual within it will be healthy as well. In other words, if the marriage is well taken care of, the children will be okay. They will feel protected. They will feel secure. They will have a clear sense of identity, and they will therefore have a foundation upon which to build good self-esteem. They will feel they belong to something that is stable and something with which they can identify. And out of that security, they will be able to develop a growing and coherent sense of who they are in the world. And that is the essence of self-esteem in a child. That's the way that families should work, in an atmosphere of consistent parent-centeredness. But unfortunately, in many cases, and in perhaps the majority of cases, it is not the way the American family works. For the marriage to be the number one priority in the family means, among other things, that the man and the woman function primarily in the roles of husband and wife. Those are, after all, the roles they committed themselves to on the day they were married. All too often in the American family, however, when the husband and wife begin having children, those primary roles begin to change. Slowly but surely, the woman stops functioning primarily in the role of wife and begins functioning primarily in the role of mother. Simultaneously, the man shifts from his primary role as husband into the role of breadwinner. This process happens unconsciously. These two people make this change to breadwinner and mother without thought or even awareness. It's as if the birth of a child activates a cultural program that says, wife, your primary obligation is now to your children, and husband, your primary obligation is to ensure financial security for your family. And so, the original contract, the commitment to one another as husband and wife, starts breaking down. And as this insidious shift in roles takes place, the wife, now mother, begins to measure her self-esteem against how well behaved her children are and how well they do in school. And likewise, the husband, now breadwinner, begins to measure his self-esteem against how much money he makes, how quickly he climbs the career ladder, and how much social prestige he secures for himself and his family. So now we have two people moving in essentially opposite directions. And as this movement proceeds, the two roles that originally defined the relationship between this man and this woman, and the only two roles that are truly capable of stabilizing and defining the family, the roles of husband and wife, get put on the shelf. The woman becomes increasingly involved with her children, and the man becomes increasingly immersed in his career. And each of these two people can see the other person's movement away from the common center of their marriage, but they're not able, either of them, to see their own part in the process. The wife sees that her husband is coming home later and later from the office, and when he does come home, he often brings the office with him, if not physically, then mentally, so that even at home he seems constantly preoccupied with his work. Likewise, the husband sees that his wife is increasingly unavailable to him when he is home, because her time and energies are so consumed with thinking about the children. Neither of these people, however, can see and understand that there are two sides to the story. The wife sees only half the picture, the half seen from her perspective. The husband sees only the half seen from his perspective. When the marriage becomes secondary to the roles of mother and breadwinner, an undefined resentment begins to develop. The husband begins to feel increasingly angry over the fact that his wife gives more time to the kids than she does to him, even when he is at home. And the wife becomes increasingly angry at the fact that her husband gives more time to his career than he does to her. Now, in our culture, we don't do a very good job of teaching people to confront relationship problems like this directly. So, instead of putting their cards on the table, these two people begin playing games to express and deal with their built-up resentment. You see, both people realize intuitively that there's something wrong with their situation, but neither of them can put their finger on it, and each of them tends to see it in terms of the other person's fault. To continue, one of the games that these two people begin playing is a game that some of you may recognize. It's a game called Who Had the Worst Day? If you don't recognize it, or you need your memories refreshed, I'll take some time to describe this peculiar sport. The game of Who Had the Worst Day begins sometime after 5:30 when Dad finally comes home from work. I'm going to be talking here about a more or less traditional family in which the husband works outside the home and the wife works inside the home, but this game can be played even if both people have wage-earning careers. To continue, Dad pulls into the driveway and the word filters out through the house that he's home. Immediately, the children start bouncing around wildly so as to greet Dad properly when he walks through the door. Dad parks the car, gets out, and immediately assumes his position in the game, which is the I've had a bad day position. His shoulders are slumped, he has a downcast expression, and he shuffles when he walks, dragging his briefcase behind him. He makes it to the house, opens the door, and is immediately met by a stampede of children, each of them wanting something from him. They want to show him what they made in school, they want to tell on one another, they want to complain about mom, and so on and so forth. And some 10 feet behind this commotion there stands a lonely figure, and she is in her version of the I've had a bad day position as well. But her position is quite different from her husband's, because she's at rigid attention, her hands clenched at her sides, her pupils dilated, her nostrils flared, and every vein in her neck standing out. Her hair and her clothes are messed and crumpled, and she is breathing fire. She doesn't have to say anything, because every nuance of her body language screams, I've had it! If she says anything at all, it's something like, well, it's about time you got home. These kids have been driving me crazy all day, and now they're yours, buddy. Let's see how long it takes for them to drive you completely bonkers. Well, the game goes on from there, and occasionally the husband wins. He persuades his wife to sympathize with him about what a bad day he's had and how nasty his boss is, and his wife allows him to collapse in his favorite easy chair and zonk out behind the paper or in front of the television. But sometimes the wife wins the game, and her hangdog husband takes the kids out for a ride to let her relax, and they pick up supper at the Chinese restaurant so that she doesn't have to cook, and he might even put the kids to bed that night. But this is all a charade, because who had the worst day is a game nobody really wins. In fact, it's a game that people play because they've already lost something. The game of who had the worst day is played in families in which priorities have been misplaced. The husband and wife have begun to function in roles which do not complement one another. You see, a husband has a mate, and a wife has a mate, but a mother has no mate, because there is no adult role that truly fulfills and truly complements the role of mother. Likewise, breadwinner has no mate. So these two people become increasingly isolated from one another, increasingly polarized in roles that have no partner, increasingly distant in terms of their communication and their intimacy. It should come as no surprise to hear that the divorce rate among people 45 and older has been accelerating faster than the divorce rate for any other age group in the country. One reason for that is that in the last 30 to 50 years, we have trained mothers to be so self-sacrificing toward their children, and fathers to become so involved in their careers, that when children leave home, these two people have forgotten how to be partners. By no means am I ignoring realities. Children have to be raised, and money has to be made. I'm simply saying that wives should remain wives, first and foremost, even after they become mothers. And I'm also saying that husbands should remain husbands, first and foremost, regardless of the demands of their careers. Mother, father, breadwinner, those are all secondary roles. Husband and wife, those are the primary ones. Those are your priorities. And again, to the extent that you keep your priorities in place, your children will be okay. If all of this is somewhat difficult to digest and accept and reconcile, it's only because that cultural program to which I referred earlier is so demanding and insistent. And because it's so powerful, and because it's so pervasive, we succumb to it without thinking. The bad news is that many American families are in trouble because husbands and wives have lost touch with their original commitments, their original roles. The good news is that this is a very easy problem to fix. To fix it, you must first wake up and face the fact that you have lost touch with that commitment, that you have confused your priorities. Then, you recommit yourself to your marriage. You get yourself back together and you do what you have to do to demonstrate to the children that the family has regained its natural balance.